On the morning of December 19th, 1941, in the cold gray waters off the coast of Libya, one of the Royal Navy's most modern light cruisers vanished in less than 20 minutes. HMS Neptune, flagship of Force K, struck a single German naval mine, a weapon that cost less than $20 to manufacture, and within minutes, over 700 sailors were fighting for their lives in burning, freezing water. Little did they know, this first explosion was only the beginning. What happened next would become one of the deadliest naval disasters in Royal Navy history, and one of the most haunting examples of how a cheap, forgotten weapon could destroy a floating fortress of steel, firepower, and human lives. This is the story of HMS Neptune, the pride of Britain's Mediterranean fleet, and how one mine turned victory into catastrophe. By late 1941, the Mediterranean Sea had become one of the most dangerous naval battlegrounds of the Second World War. Control of the sea lanes between Italy and North Africa meant survival or defeat for entire armies. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps depended on fuel, ammunition, tanks, and food shipped across the Mediterranean from ports like Naples and Taranto to Tripoli and Benghazi. The Royal Navy's mission was simple in theory: stop those convoys at all costs, but brutally difficult in practice. Axis aircraft dominated the skies, Italian submarines hunted beneath the waves, and German surface raiders lurked near key shipping routes. To counter this threat, Britain formed a hard-hitting strike group known as Force K, based at Malta. Its job was aggressive interdiction, intercepting Axis convoys at night, launching sudden surface attacks, and disappearing before enemy aircraft could respond. Force K's flagship was HMS Neptune, a Leander-class light cruiser displacing just over 10,000 tons fully loaded. She was armed with 8 6-inch guns, multiple anti-aircraft batteries, and 8 torpedo tubes. At 32 knots, she was fast enough to chase down convoys and heavily armed enough to destroy anything short of a battleship. Commissioned in 1934, Neptune had already seen action in the Atlantic and Indian Oceans before transferring to the Mediterranean in 1941. By December, she had become one of the Royal Navy's most feared raiders in the region. Her captain, Commander Rory O'Connor, was a seasoned officer known for calm discipline and precision navigation. Under his leadership, Force K, composed of Neptune, the light cruisers HMS Aurora and HMS Penelope, and the destroyers HMS Lively and HMS Lance, had destroyed or captured over 60,000 tons of Axis shipping in just a few weeks. In November 1941 alone, Force K sank 2 major Italian supply convoys, crippling Rommel's fuel reserves and halting armored operations across North Africa. British intelligence reports indicated Axis logistics were nearing collapse. But unknown to Force K, the enemy had begun preparing a deadly counterstroke, one not involving battleships, aircraft, or submarines, but something far cheaper and more invisible: naval mines. The Kriegsmarine's specialized mine-laying submarine U-331 and Italian surface mine layers had quietly laid extensive minefields off the coast of Tripoli and Benghazi, precisely in the paths British cruisers were using to ambush convoys. Each mine cost less than $20 in raw materials. Each mine could sink a ship worth millions. And HMS Neptune was sailing straight toward them. On December 18th, 1941, British intelligence intercepted Axis radio traffic suggesting a major Italian convoy would depart Tripoli under heavy escort, carrying fuel, ammunition, and replacement tanks for Rommel's Afrika Korps. The convoy included the transports Ankara, Mantovani, and Vetta Pisani, guarded by destroyers and torpedo boats. At 1,730 hours, Admiral Sir Philip Vian authorized Force K to intercept. By 1900 hours, Neptune, Aurora, Penelope, Lively, and Lance slipped out of Malta's Grand Harbor under radio silence, their silhouettes fading into the Mediterranean dusk. The weather was calm but moonless, ideal for surface interception but dangerous for navigation in unfamiliar waters. The ships steamed west-southwest toward the Libyan coast, maintaining 20 knots. Radar operators scanned for enemy contacts while lookouts strained their eyes against the black horizon. On Neptune's bridge, Commander O'Connor reviewed charts marking known minefields, but German mine-laying activity in the area had been sporadic and poorly tracked. British mine intelligence was weeks out of date. By midnight, Force K was just 60 nautical miles north of Tripoli. The formation tightened, with Neptune leading the column, followed by Aurora, Penelope, and the destroyers screening ahead and astern. Inside Neptune, nearly 767 officers and sailors stood at action stations. Below decks, engine room crews worked in suffocating heat beside roaring turbines. In the gunnery control tower, fire control officers rehearsed engagement drills in case enemy escorts appeared. On the mess decks, some sailors clutched letters from home. Others smoked quietly, listening to the hum of machinery and the slap of waves against steel hull plating. Fear gripped the men, but it was the calm, disciplined fear of veterans who had already survived bombing raids, submarine attacks, and night surface battles. They had no idea that they were already inside a minefield. German naval mines were not crude devices. The type EMC moored mine, commonly deployed in the Mediterranean, contained nearly 300 kilograms of hexanite explosive. Anchored to the seabed by steel cables, it floated just beneath the surface, waiting for the magnetic signature of a steel hull or direct contact with a ship's keel. When triggered, the explosion could break a ship's back in seconds. Worse still, mines were invisible. There was no radar warning.
No sonar hecho. No visible periscope WAC.
Only sudden destruction. By 01:30 hours on December 19th, Force K altered course slightly southward, closing on what they believed was the convoy's likely track. The sea was calm. Visibility was moderate. No enemy contacts appeared on radar. Everything seemed routine. Little did they know, Italian mine layers Giulio Cesare and Orecco had seeded the area only weeks earlier, creating overlapping mine belts designed specifically to catch British raiders approaching from Malta. At 01:46 hours, Neptune entered the densest part of the field. And then it happened. At exactly 01:50 hours, a thunderous explosion ripped through HMS Neptune's forward hull. The blast erupted beneath the starboard bow, throwing a towering column of water and debris high into the night sky. Men on deck were hurled violently to the steel plating. Below decks, bulkheads buckled inward, lights shattered, and pipes ruptured instantly. For a split second, silence followed. Then came screams. In the forward engine room, seawater burst through ruptured hull seams, flooding compartments faster than pumps could engage. Electrical power failed across multiple sections of the ship. The bow dipped sharply as tons of seawater poured inside. On the bridge, Commander O'Connor was thrown against the chart table. Shards of glass cut his face and hands. Smoke poured from ventilation shafts. The ship immediately began losing speed. Reports flooded in. Flooding in number 1 boiler room. Fire in forward compartments. Steering gear damaged. Within seconds, Neptune had lost nearly all propulsion and steerage control. Behind her, HMS Aurora and Penelope swerved sharply to avoid collision. For a moment, confusion reigned. Officers initially suspected torpedo attack, possibly from an Italian submarine. But no torpedo tracks had been seen. Then the truth became horrifyingly clear. They were in a minefield. Commander O'Connor ordered engines stopped and damage control parties forward. Firefighting teams rushed to contain blazes ignited by ruptured fuel lines. But seawater flooded too fast. Within 3 minutes, the forward magazines were under threat. The bow sank deeper into the sea, dragging the ship's nose down at a terrifying angle. Still, Neptune did not sink immediately. Her hull, though shattered, remained largely intact aft of the explosion. If she could be towed or backed out of the field, there was still a chance. Then fate struck again. At 02:03 hours, just 13 minutes after the first explosion, Neptune drifted forward on the current and struck a second mine. This time, the blast detonated beneath the starboard side, near the boiler rooms. The explosion ripped open the hull plating, killing dozens instantly and extinguishing any remaining power. Boilers ruptured. Steam lines burst. Men were scalded alive. The cruiser's internal structure began collapsing. Fire spread through passageways. Smoke-filled compartments. Emergency lighting flickered and died. The ship's list increased sharply to starboard. Commander O'Connor ordered all hands to abandon ship. But even escape became nearly impossible. Lifeboats had been destroyed by the blasts or crushed against davits. Rafts were thrown into the water, but many were tangled in wreckage or torn apart by waves. Men leapt overboard into freezing seawater, only to find themselves surrounded by burning oil, floating debris, and the wreckage of their own ship. Still, worse was yet to come. As HMS Aurora attempted to maneuver closer to render assistance, she too struck a mine, suffering severe hull damage, but remaining afloat. Her engine stopped. Fires broke out. Only extraordinary damage control efforts saved her from sinking. Meanwhile, HMS Penelope narrowly avoided detonation by reversing engines at full emergency power, scraping past unseen mines by mere yards. Back aboard Neptune, the situation was now catastrophic. At 0215 hours, a third mine exploded beneath her midship section. This blast broke the ship's keel. The hull twisted violently. The forward section sagged downward while the stern lifted unnaturally out of the water. Structural frames snapped. Compartments flooded instantly. The cruiser's back was broken. Within moments, HMS Neptune capsized to port. Men clung to railings as the deck tilted beneath their feet. Some slid screaming into the water. Others were crushed by collapsing superstructure. Commander O'Connor was last seen helping wounded sailors toward the rail, refusing to abandon ship himself. By 0220 hours, just 30 minutes after the first explosion, HMS Neptune disappeared beneath the Mediterranean. 767 officers and men went down with her. Only one sailor survived. Able seaman Norman Walton found himself thrown into the water during the second explosion. He surfaced amid wreckage and burning oil, choking on smoke and salt water. Around him, hundreds of men were screaming, some wounded, others clinging to floating debris. The night sky glowed orange from fires raging across the sea surface. Walton swam desperately toward what looked like a Carly float, a circular cork and canvas life raft, but waves and debris kept dragging him under. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him within minutes. Then the third explosion shook the sea itself. The concussion wave slammed into him like a hammer. Debris rained from above. He was forced underwater again, losing all sense of direction. When he finally resurfaced, HMS Neptune was gone. In her place, a burning slick, scattered wreckage, and silence. The screams had stopped. Walton found himself alone. He eventually reached a floating plank and clung to it, his hands numb from cold and shock. The Mediterranean in December hovered around 15 degrees Celsius, cold enough to induce hypothermia within hours. His soaked uniform dragged him downward. Salt water burned his eyes and lungs. Nearby, burning oil still drifted across the waves. Walton had to kick continuously to avoid being engulfed in flames. Behind him, HMS Aurora struggled to get underway, damaged and barely maneuverable. Her captain had ordered withdrawal to avoid further mine strikes. HMS Penelope and the destroyers could not stop without risking total destruction themselves. No rescue ships could approach. Walton drifted alone through the darkness. For the next 5 hours, he floated in silence. The sea slapped rhythmically against wreckage. Occasionally, debris bumped against his body. Helmets, wooden planks, torn canvas, grim reminders of what had happened. Fear gripped him. Not fear of death, but fear of disappearing without witness, without record, like so many before him. By dawn, exhaustion overwhelmed him. His arms cramped. His lips turned blue. His teeth chattered uncontrollably. Salt crusted his eyelashes. His hands had lost feeling entirely. He began hallucinating. He thought he heard voices. Thought he saw ships on the horizon. But every time he tried to focus, there was nothing. Then, just after sunrise, he saw a shape on the water. At first, he thought it was wreckage. Then it moved. It was an Italian MAS torpedo boat, part of the convoy escort searching for survivors or wreckage. Walton waved weakly. His voice failed him. Miraculously, he was spotted. Italian sailors hauled him aboard. He collapsed on deck, unconscious, his body barely functioning. He would later awaken in captivity, the sole survivor of one of the Royal Navy's worst single-ship disasters of the war. Out of 767 men aboard HMS Neptune, 766 were dead. The mine that started it all had cost less than $20 to manufacture. The ship it destroyed had cost over £2 million and nearly 800 human lives. The sinking of HMS Neptune sent shockwaves through the Royal Navy. Not only had Britain lost one of its finest cruisers, but Force K, the Mediterranean fleet's most aggressive striking unit, had been effectively neutralized overnight. HMS Aurora spent months under repair. HMS Penelope narrowly escaped damage. The destroyers withdrew. For weeks, British surface interdiction of Axis convoys ceased. Rommel's Africa Corps received critical fuel and reinforcements, enabling renewed offensives in Cyrenaica and beyond. The human cost was devastating. Of the 767 men aboard Neptune, only able seaman Walton survived. Entire families lost sons, brothers, husbands, without bodies to bury, without graves to mourn. Many learned of the disaster weeks later, through terse Admiralty telegrams. Commander Rory O'Connor was posthumously commended for his leadership and composure under impossible circumstances. Damage control teams were praised for fighting flooding until the very end. Gunnery crews were remembered for maintaining discipline even as the ship disintegrated beneath them. In naval circles, HMS Neptune became a grim case study, a warning about the underestimated power of naval mines. Unlike submarines or aircraft, mines required no crew to operate once deployed. They waited silently, sometimes for months, indifferent to weather, darkness, or human intent. A cheap, passive weapon, capable of destroying the most powerful warships afloat. By war's end, naval mines would sink or damage more Allied ships than submarines. Yet their victims often vanished without witnesses, without gunfire, without battle, erased in seconds by an invisible enemy. In the Mediterranean alone, mines accounted for the loss of dozens of cruisers, destroyers, transports, and merchant vessels, reshaping entire campaigns without a single shot fired. HMS Neptune's wreck now lies on the seabed off Libya, over 1,000 meters below the surface, her steel hull preserved in darkness, her guns still pointing outward, frozen in their final moments of readiness. She remains a war grave, a silent monument to 766 men who never made it home, and to the terrifying power of the smallest weapons in modern warfare. One mine, one explosion, one 10,000-ton cruiser gone in minutes. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.